Greetings and felicitations.
Hip, hip, hurrah, tally-ho.
Well, we have an episode where we're just going to talk about the publication of a magazine that predates StarPodLog and predates Fangoria. We know that Fangoria came out of StarPodLog publications because StarPodLog started reporting on horror and monsters, and they realized the fan base was so big they needed to have a sister magazine called Fangoria. But before that, what would you say was the most popular horror magazine on the market?
Famous Monsters of Filmland. It was the most popular for a while. I mean, for its time, it was huge.
And even Famous Monsters, when sci-fi became more of a thing in the 70s, they started reporting on science fiction because there are monsters in science fiction.
And a lot of people think they're the same thing. Like if you like sci-fi, you like monsters. I mean, to the lay person, it looks like that.
And even when we look at the original series Star Trek, the episodes with the Gorn in it, or with Andorians, Telosians, Horta, they were also often known as the Monster of the Week episodes.
Well, that's why there is a book called Monsters of Star Trek. So, I mean, yeah, they had some. The salt vampire is another good example. Even though the way we see it, that's not what Star Trek was about. But yes, it did have those creatures.
So we see that Famous Monsters of Filmland tapped into that. It was a huge publication, just massive for multiple generations. But there was a newspaper-style magazine, or a tabloid-style magazine, that came out in 1972 called The Monster Times, published by Monster Time Publishing. And its focus was to be a competitor to Famous Monsters of Filmland. The editorial focus was primarily horror media, but very much like what Famous Monsters did in the 70s, they started branching out into more sci-fi. And what was unique about this tabloid is that each issue had a centerfold poster based on the feature story. What did you think about the aesthetics of this magazine?
It's so unlike what you see today. It's sort of a newspaper style with the with the old paper style pages and the black and white pictures, but it still looks good, and it still has interesting articles. I mean, that's what matters.
Totally. And what's fun, because we collect Famous Monsters of Filmland, and we collect a whole bunch of vintage magazines. What's fun about this is it's pretty plentiful. They're easy to find, and they're affordable. So for the new collector that wants to get into collecting vintage monster memorabilia, this is a great starting point. There's a total of 48 issues, and it ran from 1972 to 1976. So right when StarPodLog came on the scene, this started fizzling out. So let's talk about some of the subject matter that we find in back issues of the Monster Times.
So we have one where Star Trek is the cover story. Now, and it actually had some very good articles about Star Trek that don't really have to do with monsters. I mean, they called it the Monster Times, but it really had articles on general sci-fi such as Star Trek.
Space 1999 was a thing, so they had some features on Space 1999. Also, Godzilla, giant creatures like that, Mothra, King Kong. So it was the whole gambit of anything that was in even the fantasy realm.
Yeah, it covered several things. There's still some other Star Trek on the cover, which I guess they did that because it was popular. But they do cover other things, yes.
Now, at first, this magazine was published bi-weekly for the first 14 issues, which was very unique for its time. You got to figure a lot of magazines would start out quarterly, and then once they built up a fan base, they would go bi-monthly and then monthly. But they were aggressive. They really felt that this was going to be a big thing to start out with a extremely regular publishing schedule for the first 14 issues. And then in 1975, it switched to being bi-monthly. You have to figure that Famous Monsters of Filmland is a giant, the king, we could say, of 60s and 70s horror magazines. It would be hard to dethrone the king with a tabloid newspaper.
Well, and you have to think that the reason they chose to make it this way, the newspaper type, is because it was within their budget, so they could publish it more often to have it that way, and also there was just, they must have had a lot to report on. I mean, which is good. So, and because there was so much that they could talk about, and they must have had all these writers. So it was like, well, why not publish as much as we can?
It's interesting that in 1973, the Monster Times conducted a poll to determine the most popular movie monster. And here are the top choices. They included Frankenstein's monster, the creature from the Black Lagoon, the Mummy, Wolfman, King Kong, Count Dracula, and Godzilla was the number one most popular movie monster.
And that makes sense, yeah. but those are all definitely the most common movie monsters around, still today.
Yeah, I think that they were, because the Godzilla movies were on, at least where I was growing up, on Sundays quite often. So Godzilla and the big monsters were on people's consciousness. If we were to take this poll today, I don't think Godzilla would be rated number one. But that's one of the fun things about looking through these old tabloids, is seeing the consciousness of the horror and sci-fi fan from years ago.
And we can see how things have changed, but it's great to look at these now. And the thing is, these monsters, like that you just named, they've endured because Hollywood still keeps making movies about them.
And this publication actually made feature magazines that were supplementary. They were at a smaller size. One was called Star Trek Lives, Sci-Fi Super TV Special. That came out in 1972. Star Trek Lives, number 2, that came out in 1974. And then there was a poster special. It didn't have a title, but it was all giant monsters that came out in 1976. So for the collector, for the nostalgia buff, highly recommend checking out some back issues of the Monster Times magazines. They have a kind of half-color, half-tone colors. It's really a unique color combination. You could tell they took black and white photos and then colored them in. But there's tons of pictures in these. And there are contributing artists such as Gray Morrow, Jeff Jones, Bernie Wrightson, Neil Adams. So classics and comic book creations as well.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.